The 1980s gave us some of the most iconic cars in history. Sleek Lamborghinis, turbocharged Porsches, boxy BMWs, and muscle cars struggling to find their way in a changing world. But not every car from that neon-soaked decade became a legend. In fact, many fascinating models slipped through the cracks, forgotten by time, overshadowed by more glamorous siblings, or sold in such limited numbers that almost no one remembers them today. Yet, hidden among the era's excess and innovation are vehicles that tell a different story. They're the rare, the obscure, and the overlooked. Cars that blended bold ideas with quirky styling, often fading away as quickly as they arrived. From forgotten imports to strange domestic experiments, these machines capture the spirit of an era when automakers weren't afraid to take risks. So buckle up, because today we're counting down 12 rare 80s cars that nobody remembers, but deserve another look. Number 12. Pontiac 6000 STE. In the 1980s, Pontiac was all about performance and excitement, pushing the "We Build Excitement" slogan across its lineup. The 6000 STE Special Touring Edition was supposed to be the brand's entry into the world of European-inspired sports sedans. At launch, it looked promising: a boxy, aggressive body, digital dashboards, and features that rivaled German luxury sedans of the era. But despite its ambition, the 6000 STE quickly became one of those forgotten oddities. The biggest issue was timing. In the mid-1980s, GM was trying desperately to compete with BMW and Audi, but the engineering and build quality simply weren't there. The 6000 STE had electronic gadgets galore, digital speedometers, trip computers, voice alerts, but reliability was spotty, and many of those flashy features broke long before the cars hit 100,000 miles. Buyers who wanted German-level quality simply weren't convinced, and loyal Pontiac fans were often baffled by the sedan's luxury pricing. Performance-wise, the STE offered a V6 engine and optional all-wheel drive, which was advanced for the time. On paper, it had the chops to be Pontiac's answer to the BMW 5 Series. But in reality, handling was underwhelming, and the car struggled to shake its GM roots. The suspension wasn't nearly as refined, and the overall driving experience didn't live up to its marketing hype. By the late 80s, the Pontiac 6000 STE was already fading into obscurity, overshadowed by imports that delivered what they promised. Today, it's an ultra-rare sight, with few surviving examples. Collectors don't exactly line up for them, and most ended up scrapped when repairs became too costly. Still, the STE is a fascinating snapshot of a time when American automakers tried, and mostly failed, to match Europe's best. By 2025, spotting one on the road is like seeing a ghost of Pontiac's forgotten ambitions. Number 11. Merkur XR4 Ti. Back in the mid-1980s, Ford tried something bold, importing a European Ford Sierra and selling it in the US under a brand-new nameplate, Merkur. The Merkur XR4 Ti was meant to lure American buyers who wanted a sporty European coupe without paying BMW or Mercedes money. On paper, it had everything going for it: a turbocharged 2.3-liter engine, rear-wheel drive, and that distinctive biplane rear spoiler that screamed 80s performance. But the execution? That's where things fell apart. First, the Merkur name was completely unfamiliar to U.S. buyers. Most people had no idea how to pronounce it. Some said Merkur, others Mercure, and brand recognition never caught on. Ford's decision to sell it through Lincoln Mercury dealers only added confusion. Shoppers walked in looking for a town car, and instead saw a weird German import with a hefty price tag. Then there was the performance. While the XR4 Ti's turbocharged engine gave it decent acceleration, it also suffered from turbo lag, reliability issues, and inconsistent build quality. Compared to its European competitors, the driving experience wasn't refined enough to justify the price. Enthusiasts who bought them loved the uniqueness, but average buyers quickly moved on. Another nail in the coffin was currency fluctuations. Because the XR4 Ti was imported, the rising value of the German mark made the car too expensive in the US. By the late 80s, sales tanked, and Ford pulled the plug on Merkur entirely. Today, the XR4 Ti is a true relic of the 80s, rare, quirky, and instantly recognizable to anyone who remembers that huge rear spoiler. Most have disappeared, victims of rust, neglect, or expensive repairs. Yet for those who stumble across one at a classic car show, it's a reminder of Ford's daring but short-lived attempt to take on Europe with something completely different. Number 10. Dodge Shelby Charger. The 1980s were a strange but exciting time for Dodge, as the company leaned heavily on performance packages and special editions to stand out in a crowded market. One of the more forgotten efforts was the Dodge Shelby Charger, a collaboration with none other than Carroll Shelby himself. At first glance, that name should have guaranteed long-term fame, but today, few people even remember it existed. The Shelby Charger was based on the humble Dodge Omni/Horizon platform, which was anything but sporty. To inject some excitement, Dodge handed it to Shelby, who tuned the suspension, added body cladding, racing stripes, and boosted power with a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. For the time, its 146 horsepower may not sound like much today, but in an era when most compact cars barely cracked 90 horsepower, the Shelby Charger felt quick. Despite its improvements, the Shelby Charger suffered from two big problems. First, the base car's economy car DNA was impossible to hide. Underneath the stripes and spoilers, it was still a front-wheel drive hatchback, with cheap materials and uninspired styling. Second, Dodge quickly overshadowed it with even faster Shelby-branded models like the GLHS, which made the regular Shelby Charger seem tame in comparison. By the late 80s, the Shelby Charger quietly faded away, forgotten as muscle cars began to stage a comeback and Japanese imports grew more dominant. Collectors largely overlooked it, preferring classic 60s Shelbys or the wilder Dodge models that came later. Today, finding one is rare, and while it might spark nostalgia for die-hard Dodge or Shelby fans, the car remains largely absent from mainstream memory. It's a curious piece of 80s performance history, part hot hatch, part marketing exercise, that disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Number 9. Isuzu Impulse Turbo. If there's one car that perfectly captures the forgotten gem status of the 80s, it's the Isuzu Impulse Turbo. Designed by none other than Giorgetto Giugiaro, one of the most famous automotive designers of all time, the Impulse had the looks to stand out. Its wedge-shaped profile, hidden headlights, and sporty proportions screamed futuristic, making it one of the most stylish Japanese coupes of its era. But as history shows, style wasn't enough to save it from obscurity. Under the hood, the Impulse Turbo packed a 2.0-liter turbocharged engine, producing about 140 horsepower. Paired with rear-wheel drive, it offered surprisingly sharp performance for the time. Later versions even included Lotus-tuned suspension, giving it handling credentials that rivaled far pricier European cars. On paper, this should have been a home run. So why did it flop? The first problem was branding. Isuzu, best known in the US for its trucks and SUVs, never had a strong reputation for sporty cars. Buyers who wanted performance went to Toyota, Honda, or Nissan, leaving Isuzu stuck in the shadows. On top of that, the Impulse was relatively expensive compared to better-known competitors, making it a tough sell. Reliability also hurt its chances. While Japanese cars of the 80s were generally known for bulletproof dependability, the turbocharged Isuzu required more care and maintenance than most buyers expected. As a result, many ended up in junkyards long before they should have. Today, the Impulse Turbo is one of the rarest 80s coupes around. Very few survive, and those that do are often owned by die-hard enthusiasts who appreciate its unique styling and Lotus connection. For most people, though, the Isuzu Impulse Turbo is a complete mystery. A cool car from the 80s that hardly anyone remembers existed. Number 8. Renault Fuego. The Renault Fuego was a French attempt to capture the sporty coupe market in the early 1980s. And while it made a splash in Europe, its brief U.S. run has almost completely faded from memory. The Fuego had one thing going for it: style. Its sleek, aerodynamic design was praised at the time, and it even managed to win over a few American buyers who wanted something different from the usual domestic coupes. Underneath the sharp looks, however, the Fuego was plagued by problems. Its powertrains, ranging from small four-cylinders to turbocharged versions, never quite lived up to the sporty image. Performance was adequate at best, but nowhere near the excitement promised by its design. The turbo models helped, but by then, the reputation for mediocrity had already set in. Then there was the issue of quality. Renault's U.S. presence was already shaky, and the Fuego did nothing to improve it. Reliability problems, questionable build quality, and scarce parts made ownership a headache. Dealership support was limited, and American buyers quickly grew tired of the constant repairs. By the mid-80s, Renault's reputation was in decline, and the Fuego was quietly pulled from the U.S. market. Culturally, the Fuego became more of a punchline than a success. While cars like the Camaro, Mustang, and Supra defined the sporty coupe segment of the 80s, the Fuego became little more than a footnote. Its rarity today reflects that history. Very few were sold, and even fewer survive. For those who stumble across one now, the Fuego is a fascinating artifact. A car that looked ready to take on the world, but was doomed by poor execution. It embodies the risk-taking spirit of the 80s, but also the pitfalls that left so many cars forgotten. Number 7. Subaru XT. If there was ever a car that screamed 1980s futurism, it was the Subaru XT. With its wedge-shaped body, pop-up headlights, and aircraft-inspired cockpit, the XT looked like it had driven straight out of a sci-fi movie. Subaru wanted to prove it could build more than just quirky wagons, and the XT was its bold attempt at entering the sporty coupe market. The design was unlike anything else on American roads. The sloped nose, digital dashboard, and joystick-like controls gave it a futuristic edge. Even the steering wheel looked like it belonged in a fighter jet. Buyers who wanted something different found the XT intriguing, but different didn't always translate into sales. Performance was another mixed bag. The XT offered flat 4 and flat 6 engines, with the turbocharged versions delivering a respectable punch for the era. But compared to the Japanese heavyweights, the Toyota Supra, Nissan 300ZX, or Mazda RX-7, the Subaru XT simply didn't have the same speed or driving dynamics. It looked futuristic, but it didn't drive like a true sports car. Reliability also held it back. While Subaru was gaining a reputation for durability in its wagons, the XT's experimental tech and unusual features often caused headaches. The optional all-wheel drive was a standout feature, but it wasn't enough to overcome the XT's growing list of quirks and higher price tag. By the early 90s, the XT quietly disappeared, replaced by Subaru's more practical and successful models. Today, spotting one feels like discovering a time capsule from an era when automakers weren't afraid to take risks. Very few survive, and even fewer in good condition, making the XT a true forgotten gem of the 1980s. It may not have beaten its Japanese rivals, but the Subaru XT remains one of the most unique cars of the decade. Rare, bold, and almost completely forgotten. Number 6. Chrysler Conquest / Mitsubishi Starion. The Chrysler Conquest and its Japanese twin, the Mitsubishi Starion, were among the most ambitious sports coupes of the 1980s. With their wide-body stance, turbocharged engines, and rear-wheel drive, they looked ready to battle cars like the Nissan 300ZX and Toyota Supra. Yet despite their potential, these cars have slipped into obscurity, remembered only by hardcore enthusiasts. The Conquest / Starion offered impressive specs for the time. Turbocharged four-cylinder engines pushed out up to 188 horsepower, which was enough to keep pace with many of its competitors. The wide, muscular body gave it a presence on the road, and the handling was sharp enough to make it fun in the corners. In many ways, it was Mitsubishi's attempt to show the world it could build a serious performance machine. So why did it fade? The first problem was reliability. Turbocharging was still relatively new for many Japanese automakers, and the Conquest / Starion often suffered from overheating, fragile engines, and complicated repairs. Buyers who wanted worry-free Japanese dependability were disappointed, and word spread quickly. Another issue was branding. Chrysler sold the Conquest in the U.S., but it was essentially a rebadged Mitsubishi. That created confusion among buyers, and neither brand gave the car the marketing push it needed. As a result, it was overshadowed by stronger, better-known competitors from Toyota, Nissan, and Mazda. By the early 90s, the Conquest / Starion was gone, leaving little legacy behind. Today, surviving examples are rare, though they're starting to see interest from collectors who appreciate their bold styling and performance. Still, most people who lived through the 80s barely remember them, overshadowed by cars that became true icons of the era. The Conquest Starion was a car with potential, but in the end, it's a forgotten piece of 1980s automotive history. Number 5. Peugeot 505 Turbo. When most people think of 80s performance sedans, they think BMW, Mercedes, or maybe Audi. Almost nobody remembers that Peugeot, the French automaker better known for quirky European family cars, tried its hand at the segment with the 505 Turbo. For a brief moment, Peugeot had something that could genuinely compete with the Germans, but today, it's all but forgotten. The Peugeot 505. Turbo packed a turbocharged four-cylinder engine that produced up to 180 horsepower, which was plenty for the era. Combined with rear-wheel drive and sharp handling, The car was surprisingly fun to drive. European magazines even praised it for blending comfort with performance, calling it a true sleeper sedan. In France, the 505 had a strong following, but in the US, things didn't go as planned. The first major problem was brand recognition. Peugeot was never a household name in America, and its limited dealer network meant few people even knew the 505 Turbo existed. Those who did often had to travel far to find parts or service. Compared to BMW's strong US presence, Peugeot didn't stand a chance. Reliability issues also haunted the car. While it was stylish and well-equipped, electrical gremlins, turbocharger problems, and expensive repairs made ownership a nightmare for many Americans. Parts were scarce, mechanics unfamiliar, and resale values tanked almost immediately. By the early 90s, Peugeot pulled out of the US market entirely, leaving owners stranded with orphaned cars. Today, the Peugeot 505 Turbo is a rare sight, even in Europe. In the US, it's practically extinct. While enthusiasts may appreciate its blend of comfort and performance, the average car fan doesn't even remember Peugeot once tried to challenge the Germans. It's a perfect example of a car that had potential but faded into obscurity, one of the many forgotten treasures of the 1980s. Number 4. Mazda 323 GTX. The 1980s were a golden era for rally-inspired cars, and every manufacturer wanted a piece of the action. Mazda's contribution was the 323 GTX, a humble hatchback transformed into a fire-breathing homologation special. On paper, it was everything an enthusiast could want: a turbocharged engine, all-wheel drive, and rally-bred DNA. Yet today, the 323 GTX is one of the rarest and least remembered Japanese performance cars of the decade. Under the hood sat a 1.6-liter turbocharged four-cylinder pumping out about 132 horsepower. That may not sound like much today, but in a lightweight hatch with all-wheel drive, it was more than enough to make the 323 GTX lively and fun. The car's real strength, though, was its rally engineering. Mazda built it to compete in Group A rallying, and on twisty roads or loose gravel, the GTX could embarrass much more expensive machinery. So why did it disappear from memory? The first problem was production numbers. Mazda built only a few thousand units worldwide, and very few made it to the US. That scarcity meant most buyers never even saw one, let alone considered owning one. The second issue was durability. While the 323 GTX was quick and capable, it wasn't as reliable as mainstream Mazdas. Turbo and drivetrain problems were common, and the cost of keeping one running scared away average buyers. Many ended up abandoned once repair bills outweighed their value. In the US, the car never gained a strong following. Hot hatch fans gravitated toward the Volkswagen GTI, while rally enthusiasts often chose Subaru or Mitsubishi, as those brands gained traction in the 90s. The GTX quietly faded into obscurity, overshadowed by rivals that carried the rally torch more successfully. Today, surviving examples are ultra-rare, often only seen at enthusiast events. For those who know the story, the 323 GTX is a reminder of Mazda's daring spirit in the 80s, a forgotten hero of rally racing history. Number 3. Sterling 825/827. If there's one 80s car that perfectly captures ambition gone wrong, it's the Sterling 825 and 827. A British luxury sedan built by Rover and sold in the US under the Sterling brand, It was supposed to be the refined, European-flavored alternative to the Acura Legend. In fact, it shared much of its engineering with the Legend, including Honda's excellent V6 engine. On paper, that partnership should have been a recipe for success. In reality, it became one of the most forgotten flops of the decade. The Sterling had all the right ingredients: handsome styling, leather interiors, wood trim, and Honda reliability under the hood. But where things fell apart was execution. Rover's notorious build quality issues came through in spades. Electrical problems, poorly assembled interiors, and subpar materials meant that while the Acura Legend became a lasting success, the Sterling quickly developed a reputation for constant breakdowns. Dealership support didn't help. Sterling was a completely new brand in the U.S., with limited dealers and no reputation to lean on. Buyers who expected premium service were instead left frustrated with poor parts availability and mechanics unfamiliar with the brand. Within just a few years, resale values collapsed, and Sterling quietly exited the American market in 1991. What makes the Sterling especially forgotten is its timing. The late 80s saw Japanese luxury brands like Lexus, Acura, and Infiniti entering the market with strong, reliable sedans that set new benchmarks. Next to them, the Sterling looked like a half-baked experiment. Today, spotting a Sterling is nearly impossible. Few survive, and even fewer in good condition. Most people who lived through the 80s don't even remember the brand existed. It's a fascinating what could have been story. Proof that even with Honda's help, Rover couldn't shake its bad habits. Number 2. Toyota Celica All-Track Turbo GT4. The Toyota Celica All-Track Turbo, also known globally as the Celica GT4, was one of the most advanced performance cars Toyota offered in the late 80s. Built to homologate Toyota's entry into Group A rally racing, it packed serious engineering into what looked like a fairly ordinary liftback coupe. With all-wheel drive, a turbocharged engine, and rally pedigree, it should have been a star. Yet today, it's one of those cars that only hardcore enthusiasts remember. Under the hood sat a 2.0-liter turbocharged four-cylinder, producing around 190 horsepower, which was impressive for the time. Coupled with Toyota's rally-developed all-wheel drive system, the All-Track had the capability to dominate twisty roads and rough conditions. It was essentially Toyota's answer to cars like the Subaru WRX and Mitsubishi Lancer EVO, except it arrived years before those names became household legends. So why is it forgotten? The first issue was visibility. In the U.S., Toyota sold very few all-track models, and they were expensive compared to the standard Celica. Most buyers looking for a sporty Toyota went for the cheaper front-wheel drive Celica GTS or Supra, leaving the all-track overlooked. Maintenance also played a role. The All-Track's complex all-wheel drive system and turbocharged engine required careful upkeep, and many owners weren't prepared for the costs. As the cars aged, repairs became more expensive than their resale value justified, causing many to be scrapped. Culturally, the All-Track never got its moment in the spotlight. While it performed well in rally and overseas, American buyers never made the connection, and the car disappeared from showrooms without much fanfare. Today, surviving examples are incredibly rare. Collectors who know their rally history prize them, but the average car fan has no idea Toyota once built a Celica capable of taking on the world's best. It's a prime example of 80s performance lost to time. A rally hero that never got the recognition it deserved in the US. Number 1. Merkur Scorpio. If you thought the Merkur XR4Ti was obscure, wait until you hear about its sibling, the Merkur Scorpio. Ford introduced it to the US in the late 1980s under the short-lived Merkur brand, hoping to offer Americans a refined European luxury sedan without the premium price of a BMW or Mercedes. Unfortunately, almost nobody noticed, and those who did quickly forgot about it. The Scorpio was essentially a rebadged Ford Granada from Europe, featuring a 2.9-liter V6 rear-wheel drive and a roomy, comfortable interior. On paper, it looked competitive, smooth ride, decent performance, and more standard features than many of its rivals. It was even praised in automotive magazines for its balance of comfort and handling. But here's where it unraveled. Like the XR4Ti, the Merkur brand itself was a disaster. Few Americans understood what Merkur was, and the decision to sell them through Lincoln Mercury dealers confused buyers. On top of that, the Scorpio was expensive, costing more than many luxury competitors with far stronger reputations. Reliability was another thorn in its side. While the mechanicals weren't terrible, parts availability was a nightmare. Since the car was imported in small numbers, replacement parts were rare and costly. Owners quickly realized they were stuck with an orphaned brand, and resale values plummeted. By 1989, just a few years after its launch, Ford pulled the plug on Merkur entirely. The Scorpio vanished from dealerships, leaving almost no footprint in the U.S. automotive market. Today, the Merkur Scorpio is one of the rarest 80s sedans you'll ever come across. Most people don't even remember it existed, and those that survived are usually tucked away in obscure car clubs or enthusiast garages. It was ambitious, it was different, but ultimately, it was forgotten. The 1980s gave us icons like the Camaro, Mustang, and Supra, but it also gave us cars that slipped through the cracks, machines that were bold, quirky, and ahead of their time, yet destined to be forgotten. From French experiments to Japanese rally heroes and American oddballs, these rare cars remind us just how wild the decade really was. They may not have reached legend status, but they still tell a story worth remembering. So, the next time you see one of these ghosts from the 80s, take a second look. You're staring at a piece of history most people never knew existed.